International trade. Pull an iPhone out of your pocket. It says Apple on the back. But Apple didn't manufacture the parts, and Apple didn't put it together. The assembly happens at Foxconn, a Taiwanese company, in factories in China and India. Many of the components come from Samsung, which in earlier models accounted for as much as 26% of production costs. Samsung still makes the displays and the cameras. Now think about that for a second. Samsung is Apple's fiercest competitor in the phone business, and Apple buys parts from them anyway. That isn't a mistake or a contradiction, it's the whole logic of trade in one object. So let's unpack it. Setting the stage. Look around wherever you're sitting. The fruit in your kitchen may have come from Chile. Your clothes might be designed in Italy and sewn in China. Your car could be from Japan, Germany, or Korea. The gas in it was probably refined from crude oil pumped in Saudi Arabia, Mexico, or Nigeria. None of this is new, by the way. Economists point out that global markets were remarkably connected in the second half of the 1800s. If you want a birthday for the world economy, try 1869, the year both the Suez Canal and the Union Pacific Railroad were finished. A telegraph cable crossed the Atlantic in 1858, and by 1900, the world's major economic regions could talk to each other almost instantly. Global exports climbed from under 1% of world GDP in 1820 to 9% by 1913. Then it fell apart. World War I cut the connections. During the Great Depression, country after country tried to fix its economy by shutting out foreign goods, which made things worse. World War II finished the job. Trade rebuilt slowly, and global economic ties didn't matter as much as they had before 1914 until sometime in the early 1980s. Benjamin Franklin put it simply, no nation was ever ruined by trade. Most economists would go further. Japan, South Korea, China, India, the fastest growing economies of recent decades, all turned outward to get there. There's no modern example of a country that sealed itself off and prospered. So why does trade work? Two ideas do most of the explaining. The main idea, absolute versus comparative advantage. The first is absolute advantage. A country has it when it can produce something using fewer resources than another country. Pumping oil in Saudi Arabia is close to drilling a hole. Elsewhere, it takes expensive exploration and technology. The United States has some of the richest farmland on Earth. Guatemala and Colombia have the climate for coffee. Chile and Zambia sit on world-class copper. Geography is destiny, the saying goes, and that's a decent starting point. But it isn't the real reason trade happens. The second idea, comparative advantage, is the one that matters. Instead of asking, who can make this with fewer resources, it asks a different question. What do we give up to make it? That's opportunity cost. And in 1817, David Ricardo showed that opportunity cost, not raw productivity, is what drives the gains from trade. Here's the classic example. Say Saudi Arabia needs 1 hour to produce a barrel of oil and 4 hours for a bushel of corn. The United States needs 2 hours for oil and 1 hour for corn. Saudi Arabia holds the absolute advantage in oil, the US in corn. So far, no surprise. Now run the opportunity costs. For Saudi Arabia, 1 barrel of oil costs a quarter bushel of corn. For the US, 1 barrel costs 2 full bushels. Saudi Arabia gives up far less to pump oil, so that's its comparative advantage. Flip it, and corn belongs to the United States. With 100 worker hours each and no trade, suppose Saudi Arabia makes 60 barrels and 10 bushels, while the US makes 20 barrels and 60 bushels. World totals, 80 barrels, 70 bushels. Now let each specialize completely. World totals jump to 100 barrels and 100 bushels. Same workers, same hours, more stuff. And here's the part students often miss. Trade lets a country consume beyond its own production possibilities frontier. That line normally marks the outer limit of what a nation can make on its own. Specialize and trade, and you land outside it. Now the harder case. What if one country is better at absolutely everything? Take the United States and Mexico. It takes 4 American workers to make 1,000 pairs of shoes versus 5 Mexican workers. It takes 1 American worker to make 1,000 refrigerators versus 4 in Mexico. The US wins on both. Does trade still pay? Yes, and the reason is in the ratios. The US is slightly better at shoes, 4 workers against 5, but it is dramatically better at refrigerators, 1 worker against 4. So the US specializes in refrigerators, where its edge is largest. Mexico specializes in shoes, where its disadvantage is smallest. Shift labor accordingly, and combined output of both goods rises. Think about 6 friends going camping. One of them, Tyler, is faster at everything. Hauling packs, gathering wood, cooking, paddling? Should Tyler do all the work? Obviously not. He still only has 24 hours and the group would eat terribly while waiting on him. If he's 80% faster at cooking, but only 10% faster at pitching tents, he should cook and let someone else handle the tents. Everybody eats sooner. The deeper look. Why similar countries trade. Comparative advantage explains a lot, but it doesn't obviously explain this. Roughly half of US trade happens with similar high-income countries, and about 60% of both US and European trade is intra-industry trade, importing and exporting the same category of goods at the same time. In 2021, the United States exported $131 billion in autos and imported $317 billion in autos. Same industry, flowing both directions. Why? Two reasons: specialization and learning. Machinery isn't one product, it's thousands. The US might export woodworking equipment and import photographic processing equipment. That's not about German or Japanese workers being smarter. It's that firms working on very specific products develop very specific skills. This gets taken to an extreme through what economists call splitting up the value chain. The value chain is just the stages of making something. For the iPhone, designed and engineered in the United States, components from Korea, assembly in China, marketing back in the United States. Cheaper communication and shipping made that possible. So countries increasingly don't trade finished cars, they trade dashboards, or the shelving that goes inside a refrigerator. Economies of scale. As output rises, average cost per unit falls, at least up to a point. Picture a toaster oven plant. At 30 units, cost is $30 each. At 50 units, $20. At 150 units, $10. Beyond that, the savings flatten out. Here's the tension. One large factory could supply all the cars a country like Belgium buys in a year. Efficient, but with one or two producers, buyers get almost no choice, and firms face almost no pressure to improve. Trade solves both problems at once. Big factories get their scale, and consumers still get competition and variety. If GM, Ford, and Chrysler were the only options in America, cars would be worse. They compete with Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen, Kia, BMW, and a dozen others, and American cars got better for it. One more idea worth holding on to. Comparative advantage is dynamic. When it comes from learning and scale rather than climate or mineral deposits, it can shift. No country is locked into what it's good at today. Wrapping up, a few things to carry with you. Absolute advantage means using fewer resources. Comparative advantage means giving up less. The second one is what makes trade work. Even a country that's better at producing everything still gains by specializing where its edge is biggest and trading for the rest. Tyler should cook, not pitch tents. Specialization pushes total output up, which lets nations consume beyond what they could produce alone. Similar rich countries trade heavily inside the same industries, and those gains come from specialized learning, split-up value chains, and economies of scale that still leave room for competition. Tariffs are taxes on imports, and the World Trade Organization exists to negotiate them down. The Doha round alone could add $121 to $202 billion a year to the world economy. That's under 1%, but it repeats every year, and it doesn't count harder to measure gains like variety, competition, and transferred knowledge. Smaller and lower income economies gain the most, since they have fewer trading options at home. Roughly $20 trillion in goods and services crosses borders every year. Something that large will always cause disruption and argument, and those arguments deserve their own conversation. What we've covered here is why the exchange creates value in the first place. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and join us for the next lesson as we continue exploring the fascinating world of economics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.